was speaking at the chat and that's It's not particularly easy to follow a set of presentations like that. Yeah, I think I'll throw it in. Can I just go ahead and pull it out? So, yeah, my name's Gus. I work for an NGO called Privacy International. We're a London-based charity. And knowing that I was going to follow such incredible speakers, I thought I would try to keep things a little bit more uncertain. Because I'll be honest, despite what you think, I'm actually incredibly optimistic for the future. All the challenges that the first two speakers identified don't frustrate me at all. And even the challenges we face in the Snowden era worry me greatly about what kind of society we are now, but fundamentally I don't worry about the future in the way that the future will be an extension of the present, because we are not dumb enough to build the future based on what it is we have now. We're just not that dumb enough. So just to describe the kind of work that we do, we work in three domains, or three program areas. The first is we work on surveillance. Well, that's a given. If you're a privacy organization, you're going to focus on surveillance issues. So whether it is the Snowden files, whether it is the technology that enables surveillance by governments and other entities, we focus on that. We try to out the industry that builds it. We also do, I would say the bulk of our work is actually in the Global South. We went in to do work in India about 7 or 8 years ago, and the first response was very much a cultural response. Indians don't care about privacy. The NGOs that I tried to convince to work with us on this issue said to me, they laughed in my face and said, we're not going to work on this issue. Lo and behold, we did find an NGO to work on the issue, and they have done a phenomenal job at creating an issue out of privacy in India. It did help that the government of India did embark on a program to fingerprint and iris scan the entire population that then generated a debate. And it's about the debate, it's about the discussion. It's not about the situation of winning or losing, it's about the debate. And so we just released a report last week on Uganda, where we were doing an investigation of the types of surveillance technologies the Ugandan government is using and how they're using it. And we can get into cultural arguments about how the Ugandan people conceptualize privacy, or we can just look at the pure exertion of power using surveillance, and we saw that they were hacking the mobile phones and the computers of the opposition movement, the protest movements, the artists. All those movements who were rising up against the government, they were under surveillance. So yeah, we do a great amount of work in the global South, Latin America, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, and Southeast Asia, India and Pakistan. So it's that kind of work. The third area is the one I'm going to show you some of the slides of, the kinds of presentations I give. And it's an area we call data exploitation. It's trying to understand the way data is created. The first two speakers, and I'm not trying to diminish their talks, because they actually got to the point where I want to focus on, but they often speak about how we disclose things to Facebook. We hand things over. There are two problems with that imagery. First, there's this idea that I wake up every morning wanting to tell Mark Zuckerberg my life. I'm trying to communicate to other people. I'm trying to communicate. It just so happens somebody's created a space where they try to control and own what it is I create. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that we actually think it's about the fact that we have divulged, that we have given up our rights, and we are somehow part of this machine, when the darker stuff, and the two previous speakers did focus on this a little bit, the darker stuff is the stuff that we don't even know we're giving up. It's the metadata in the photographs that show the location of where the photograph was taken. It is the fact that Facebook and Twitter and my email service provider knows what time I wake up every single day, because the first thing I do when I wake up is I check all those things. So they know when I wake up, they know when I go to bed, they know if I've gone on an airplane because I haven't logged in for a while. They know these things. And it's not as if I checked in to say, hey, Facebook, I've woken up. That's not how it works. And so the problem that we're facing, though, is how do we communicate these challenges? How do we communicate to the public, and I'm not particularly worried that people don't worry about these things. I want people to go about their daily lives. I want them to be able to communicate. I want them to be able to profess to the world how they feel and what they are. But I want them to know what is happening to them, what is being done to them, and hopefully that will change the system but beneath it. But the challenge we face, though, is that our imagery is so poor. You do a search on Google Images for surveillance, you see CCTV cameras, the most pointless form of surveillance in the history of surveillance. Anybody who's deploying CCTV today is an idiot, because there are so many more interesting ways to track people, to identify people, than CCTV, silly little boxes that accomplish very little. But we do a terrible job at Privacy International too. We try to explain our work, and we talk about the surveillance trade, and we show policemen with batons. We try to talk about the intelligence agencies, and we show golf balls that are essentially where the 1980s technology of global surveillance existed. We talk about the work we do in the global south and do capacitation of NGOs across the world, and we have like an apartheid era fist in the air. And we talk about the work we do at the UN, and we have a bunch of flags. That's kind of pointless too. So we're pretty bad at it, and the media is pretty bad at it too. This is an article in a very good German publication about some of the work we do on tracking surveillance technology, where it ends up, and what is done. And we found in one case, the Bangladeshi Rapid Action Battalion, a brutal part of the Bangladeshi government, was procuring technology through Switzerland from German companies, and we were able to interdict on that. We were able to stop the flow of this. And so the whole article about it shows guns. That's not how this happens anymore. But we don't have any other way of portraying it. Another example, a massive hack occurred earlier this year against the part of the US government that does background checks on people who have security clearance. So it is essentially on 20 million odd Americans, it is all the dirt on people who are in the intelligence agencies, in law enforcement, in high-level government positions. All that dirt is collected by one agency, the Office of Personnel Management, along with their fingerprints, stored in a database, and it got hacked. And at least 5 million people's fingerprints were stolen, and 22 million people's essentially blackmail files were stolen by somebody. Huge story in the United States, huge story for this domain, huge story for national security. And all we could do is take a photograph of the office building in this newspaper, in this ABC article. We don't have a way of visualizing this loss, this loss of control, this flow of data outbound that we don't have any ability to curtail. And of course, we try to create, recreate the Orwellian Big Brother, and whether it's this minister in this country and the minister in any country, odds are you're eventually going to get a big photo of their face on a poster or in the media, trying to draw that allegory, try to draw our minds back to the fact that we all read 1984 when we were at some point in school. But that's not particularly helpful, but it does really capture, well, the social imaginary. And then there's just this type of imagery, the fingerprint, which is kind of stupid because it requires you to touch something. You don't touch things anymore that actually can create this level of surveillance. And I don't even know why there's an RFID tag in there or a laser, but this is just how people do things. Or of course, there's always a shady individual who's communicating. I'm surprised this individual's not in a basement wearing a baseball cap backwards. But this is all about terrorists using WhatsApp. This is from the Indian media. Although one of my favorites of the media coverage, in order to get the privacy message to the largest audience, that we took the UK government to court about their surveillance practices of GCHQ, and we filed on behalf of a number of NGOs to find out whether or not we were placed under surveillance. And lo and behold, the government had to admit, yes, 2 organizations were placed under surveillance, one of whom was this small organization called Amnesty International. The UK government, for purposes of national security, was placing Amnesty International under surveillance. And so the best way to draw people's attention to this is to get it on the front page. And the imagery was fantastic. I bet you got more people reading that article that day than any time before that. And Apple changed their policy around her music as well. But it is going to get more challenging to represent these things. So if we couldn't do it well before, it's going to get even more challenging. This is a fantastic graphic from Intel talking about what the future is going to look like. They're basically, it's a timeline of how many computers and devices are connected to the internet. In 1960, 0. By 2000, they're saying about 14 million are connected, and they're saying by 2020, 31 billion devices will be connected to the internet. We have to stop imagining the individual behind the computer. That's what the imagery is, the individual behind the computer, the individual on the mobile phone, and we have to understand that our spaces are going to be connected to the internet, that things are going to be part of the internet, and they're going to be saying things about us, collecting things about us without our participation, without our knowledge. So that's why I really hate the narrative of we give things away, because we're not actually giving it away. We are participating in public life. And this information is being accumulated, and things are being done to this information that we cannot control. Here's another interesting example of this Internet of Things. Samsung has smart TVs. Smart TVs is all the rage right now, and basically it's TVs with cameras and microphones. And lo and behold, Samsung and LG also get caught with it. These devices are listening to you. They're listening to you and sending your voice patterns to these TV companies. They're actually also monitoring what it is you watch and sending this information to the TV manufacturing companies. And so when the media covers it, they cover it with the 1950s television and eye. The eye thing really bothers me. I don't know why, but we keep on coming back to it. And this Internet of Things is the Internet of the person, too. And so this is, I can't remember which publication this is. I'm a little embarrassed that I'm stealing it from them. But they're trying to explain how the individual is now connected to the Internet. And some of this is willing, but some of this is not necessarily known. I have an Apple Watch, for instance. It's connected to the internet in theory, but it isn't, but it is. We can get into that in the discussion point. But we're still struggling to communicate some of these challenges, except when we use their own imagery. For a long time, we had a challenge of explaining what GCHQ and NSA were doing when it comes to hacking the internet and how they were spying on Google and Google users. Until one of the Snowden documents included an image that was drawn by an intelligence agent who was trying to explain how they hacked Google. And what this little graphic shows, and this was in the Washington Post, it was actually close to the front page of the Washington Post. They say, look, here's Google, and here's Google communicating with its users, and here's Google servers communicating as well. And this is secure, and this is secure. So all we have to do is insert ourselves in the middle. And there's a nice little smiley face. And when the Washington Post presented this to Google engineers, and they saw this graphic in particular, and that smiley face, they were livid. They were absolutely livid. That was the moment it made sense to them. No amount of documents was going to nail the Google engineer. This nailed the Google engineer, their own imagery. And these images actually crashed our server about 1.5 years ago. These images are of the, so the Guardian newspaper had the Snowden files on them, on computers, just up the street at King's Cross. The government got annoyed and told the Guardian, you must destroy these files, you shouldn't have the files. The Guardian said, you can't tell us to do that, and we have the files in New York anyway, so go to hell. The government showed up and said, you must destroy the files, and so the Guardian said, fine, we'll delete them. And the government said, no, actually, we want you to destroy the computers that have the files on them. And so they went to the basement and they brought a grinder and they said, okay, well, destroy the computer. So the Guardian staff took the hard drives and destroyed them. The government said, that's not enough. We want you to kill this chip, that chip, and there was about 15 or 20 specific chips that had to be destroyed. And so the Guardian then gave us access to the remains. And we looked at the chips, and it's like, okay, we understand the hard drive was destroyed, but what's everything else? And it led to a whole investigation to find out what's actually going on in our devices. If these chips, so the government thinks these chips are doing something even when the computer's turned off. What do we know about these chips? And so we wrote to the companies and asked, what do you know about these chips? And they said, what do you know about these chips? Nobody actually knew. And so the tech community got so exercised by the fact that we had these images. They all came to our website and crashed our website because they wanted to have a look. But then the V&A had an exhibit where those actual pieces of computer were on display. And they actually had the editor of The Guardian come give a talk at the opening of that exhibit to show this is an artifact of the surveillance state. This is an artifact of censorship as we know it today, the destruction of a device. But I'm getting sidetracked. And then we have the new emergent infrastructure, Internet of Things, and we're seeing new forms of advertisement from industry, how to communicate, how wonderful this thing is. I don't know why gold data streams matter, but it makes everybody feel nice, warm, and cuddly. And they're promising a managed, connected, and secured world. What the hell are we promising? And this is IBM's articulation of big data and smart cities all brought together, where they have these nice, gentle, friendly images of law enforcement in a nice, gentle blue. Doesn't that make you feel calm and happy? They don't mention law enforcement anywhere in here, but they do have that image nonetheless. And then there's other images of the smart city. It's a managed city. It's an environmentally friendly city that's littered with sensor devices, watching and listening and monitoring movement, activities, and everything. For who? For what purpose? And you start seeing some of the more darker advertising and some of the more darker industries where they say, well, look, it's for law enforcement, and they use handcuffs to try to describe it's for law enforcement. It's like you're getting good talking about the data stuff, and then you use freaking handcuffs. It's so old school, and the symbol, of course, for information management. But this is what it's there for. It is to manage society. It is to accumulate information, understand what's going on, and control society. And they've done it before. This is the advertising from the surveillance industry about taking this wonderful thing called the internet, painting it in a dark, sinister green, and saying we can control it. We can build this center that will monitor the internet. The pictures of the internet are supposed to be nice, cuddly, warm. This is how the surveillance industry promises the internet shall be. And then there's some interesting work going on across civil society of trying to understand how we can communicate the challenges of the future when algorithms are determining who's good, who's bad, who deserves to proceed to go, who does not. And of course there's the wonderful XKCD that always has a way of capturing some of these issues. You always have the technologist saying, oh, I can do some incredible form of encryption to secure my devices and secure my communications. And then, well, actually the government's just going to beat down your door, beat over your head, and get access to everything anyways. But I think the parting words I have is, I'm trying to say where we're struggling with our communications, but we still haven't been able to articulate how data emerges, how data can be used. And we always fall back on Orwellian notions or eyes or the police baton and other such things, and we're struggling. And I think we're struggling also to imagine who and what does the individual future look like. And this is the Orwellian boot stamping on the human head forever. That's actually a line from 1984 where it's asked, what do you think the future looks like? Well, it's a boot stamping on the human head forever. Or there's the cyborg notion. This is Steve Mann, a professor at the University of Toronto, who actually is a cyborg. He's connected these things to his body, and it's actually hard for him to take off. But arguably, he could control the ones and zeros and the data that's emitted from his body and from his person and from his devices. Is that what we need to be? Or again, Google search gave this of an empowered young woman who's able to control some interface that I wish we had, but still doesn't capture some of the issues I'm trying to raise, because this is my last slide. How do we draw the future? How do we visualize what the future looks like from a technological perspective when the technology is disappearing? Where we're not going to see the cameras anymore. They're going to be little devices all over the place, but we can't show them. So how are we going to represent them? If we can't represent them, and we can't visualize them, we can't get people to understand, or to know, or to question, or to worry. And so these are some of the questions I have for this community and other communities, like how do you represent intelligence? Whether it's an intelligence agency or intelligence over other people or your own intelligence. How do you represent control and what does it look like in the future? How do you visualize autonomy and dignity in the future without talking about the individual holding up his hand as if he's some hero fighting against the oppressor? And from a language perspective, we can talk about this later, but like, I actually don't know what the word protection and security means anymore. And I think it's going to create some really interesting new debates that fundamentally mean it's going to get better. It's really going to get better once we figure these things out. Thank you.